What do you do when you have a big problem with no obvious solution? Do you panic, or do you stay calm and figure it out? Sometimes we don't have a choice but to panic. Like if your house is on fire, for example. That would be a good time to panic. But what about when you have time to think about your problem? What's the best way to deal with it? Some people will pray fervently, others will seek advice from those they trust. But what if you could do both of these things at the same time? That's what today's story is about. It's the story of Pharaoh having a dream and seeking wise counsel, including from God, to help him solve his problem. So let's dive right into it. Pharaoh had a dream. This was not just any dream, though. It was an ominous dream that foretold trouble in store for Egypt. In fact, it foretold nothing less than 7 years of famine. Pharaoh awoke in the middle of the night in a cold sweat. His heart pounded in his chest, and he cried out for his counselors to come quickly to his side. They came running, no doubt wondering why the king had summoned them in the middle of the night. The royal court was full of intrigue, and one never knew what would set Pharaoh off. But Pharaoh wasn't looking for their political advice this time. No, he needed something else. He needed wisdom. He told them about his dream, how he saw the river Nile turn to blood, the fish dying in the river and people fainting from hunger. And then there was nothing but famine for 7 whole years. Now you might think that Pharaoh should have ignored the dream. After all, dreams aren't real, so why worry about them? But the Bible says that this dream troubled Pharaoh greatly. Pharaoh was not a fool. He realized that if what he had dreamed came to pass, his people would suffer immensely. If the granaries were emptied and people starved to death, there would be chaos in the land. People would fight each other, loot stores, and break down the doors of houses to steal food. There would be lawlessness everywhere. He didn't want that for his people. He wanted to protect them. But how? He called for his wise men and magicians, but they couldn't help him. They told him that it was a trick of his subconscious mind. Even his priests chimed in, saying that this was the God's way of testing his faith. Now, usually I would agree with the priest. When God tests our faith, it's for a purpose. We learn something valuable about ourselves, about God, or both. But the thing was, Pharaoh didn't have a relationship with God. He had never asked God to reveal himself to him or lead him. In fact, his priests told him God's ways were hidden from kings like him. The only person who could interpret Pharaoh's dream was someone even wiser than his magicians and priests, someone with wisdom from God. He needed Joseph. Joseph was more than just a dreamer. He was a prophet who could interpret dreams. His track record was perfect. He had already interpreted the dreams of his jailer and saved him from death. And before that, he had interpreted the dreams of the butler and baker, foretelling the rise of one and the fall of the other. Pharaoh summoned Joseph and recounted the dream for him, admitting that no one in his court could interpret it. Joseph listened carefully to Pharaoh and thanked him for his trust. Then he said he had an idea, but it would take some time. Pharaoh agreed to wait as long as Joseph could give him an answer within 2 days. Joseph went home, held to God to help him interpret the dream. Then he told his brothers to prepare for a trip to Egypt. He loaded up wagons with grain from their homes and led the caravan to the palace. When he presented himself to Pharaoh, he interpreted the dream for him. He told him that 7 years of plenty would be followed by 7 years of famine. Because of their wealth, the Egyptians would most likely ignore the coming famine until it was too late. They would start begging their neighbors for food, but those neighbors would not have any to spare. Joseph told him that he would need to find someone wise and discreet who would take charge of the situation. He suggested that Pharaoh appoint officials over all the land of Egypt, whose duty would be to gather 1/5 of all produce during the 7 years of plenty. That way, they would have enough food to sustain the entire nation during the famine. Pharaoh liked Joseph's idea, especially because it didn't involve bowing down to any god. So he put Joseph in charge of the project and gave him a noble title. Everyone worked hard to follow Joseph's plan. Over the next few years, they gathered so much food that nobody could have imagined that there would ever be a famine. Just as Joseph predicted, 7 years passed, then the famine began. Sure enough, everyone's stored grain started to look like sand through a sieve. The fat in the land grew thin, but the Egyptians were prepared. Joseph had appointed honest and capable men to oversee the grain storage, so they didn't steal any of it. And although the famine lasted for 7 years, not a single person in Egypt starved to death. And that's the end of our story. To understand what we can learn from it, let's consider the 2 decisions Pharaoh had to make. First, he had to decide whether or not to believe in Joseph's interpretation of his dream. Second, he had to decide how to respond to the news of the famine. Let's start with his first decision. In a situation like Pharaoh's, what would you do? Would you pay attention to a dream, or would you dismiss it? In our story, Pharaoh felt troubled after the dream, but it was his advisors who encouraged him to investigate it further. In our own lives, it's easy to get caught up in the busyness of life and ignore little things that do and seem important at the moment. Maybe you've had a dream or a premonition that you've tried to shake off. Don't make fun of your intuition. Take it seriously and investigate it further. Like Pharaoh, you may be surprised by what you discover. Next, Pharaoh had to decide how to respond to the news of the coming famine. Joseph suggested storing grain for the future, which meant that Pharaoh would have to spend money now in order to save lives later. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. When Pharaoh took action, he saved the lives of his people. Sometimes God lets us face problems so we can develop a habit of trusting Him and taking action. He doesn't want us to sit back and wait for Him to work a miracle. He wants us to participate. As believers, we are commanded to be diligent in our work, whether we're working for ourselves or for God. In the book of Proverbs, it says that whatever your hands find to do, do it with your might. This means that we should never shirk from hard work. We should also be proactive. One of the Hebrew words for faith means to be active. We must remember that preparation is a form of faith. Before Joseph's plan could be put into action, Pharaoh had to believe that a famine was coming, and that Joseph's plan was the best way to deal with it. Joseph didn't just say, "Hey Pharaoh, here's my plan," but he also helped Pharaoh to put it into action. He gathered a team, made sure they understood what needed to be done, and then supervised them as they did their work. See, Joseph didn't just have faith that God would deliver his people, he also acted as if he believed. This is an important lesson for us. We can't just sit around waiting for God to intervene in our lives. We must also play our part. We must believe that God can deliver us, but we must also take steps to bring about our deliverance. Only then will we experience true faith. So what are the lessons we learned from today's story? First, we must be willing to listen to God's voice when He speaks to us through dreams or still small voices. And second, we must take action when we hear God's voice. We must not be lazy or complacent, but diligent and proactive. Remember, preparation is a form of faith. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe so you won't miss the next video. Also, please share this video with your friends and family. Until next time, shalom. Want more? Download detailed ebooks at www.downloadhaven.online. Start downloading now.